everybody. I hope everyone is doing well. And welcome to the second class, the second session of this course on the Lam Rim, focusing on a text called The Easy Path. So I thought to start with some meditation this morning, first to settle down our minds and then generate a good motivation. And then do a little bit of meditation on the Buddha to try to get a deeper sense of something I spoke about last week, the meaning of enlightenment and our potential to become enlightened, just like the Buddha. Okay, so make yourselves comfortable. Also, just in case anyone forgot to do this, please turn off your phone or put it on airplane mode so it's not ringing and disturbing you during this session. Okay, so sit comfortably. Try to keep your back straight, whether you're sitting on the floor, cross-legged, or you're sitting on a chair. It's always good to have a straight back. But at the same time, try to let your body be as relaxed as possible, not tight or tense. And bring your awareness into your body. Your awareness might be a bit scattered because of what you were doing just before this session. You might still be thinking about things that you did, things that you said, things that you heard, saw. So put those things aside for now and try to just be in the present moment and present place. And there may also be thoughts in your mind about what you're going to do later after this session, later today. So put those aside as well. You can always take them up again later. But really try your best during this period of time to just stay present in the here and now. And paying attention to the breath flowing in and out is a good way to do that, because our breath is happening right here in the present. So when we're paying attention to our breath, our mind is naturally in the present. So do that for a few minutes to calm down and settle down your mind. And now let's take a few more moments to check our motivation and do our best to generate a positive motivation. So if that So if you're familiar with the motivation of bodhicitta, the aspiration to become enlightened, to help all living beings, you can bring that into your mind. If you're not familiar with that, try to have an altruistic motivation, meaning wanting to benefit others, wanting to do good for others and for the world. And then think that you're here to listen and learn things that will help you to accomplish that. So last week I gave a brief explanation of enlightenment or awakening or Buddhahood, the state that the Buddha attained, and how this is something we can all do. We all have the potential to attain that state. So I'd like you to try to visualize the Buddha in front of you, about the level of your forehead, a few feet away. And the whole visualization is made of light, pure, transparent, radiant light. And the Buddha is sitting with his legs in the full lotus position on top of a seat consisting of a lotus and two discs representing the sun and the moon. His body is made of golden light. His right hand is resting on his right knee, with the fingers stretched out and touching the ground or the seat beneath him. This is called the earth touching posture or gesture. His other hand is in his lap with the palm facing upwards, holding a bowl containing medicinal healing nectar that mainly cures our inner suffering, the poisons within our mind. And he's wearing the robes of a monk, saffron-colored robes. And his face is peaceful, smiling. You can imagine he's looking right at you with a gaze that expresses his pure, unconditional, unwavering compassion and love and dedication. He's totally dedicated to helping you and every other living being without exception, helping you to be free of suffering and helping you to actualize your potential to attain the highest state, enlightenment. So if you're unfamiliar with the practice of visualizing, you may find this difficult to do. Don't worry. It's something we can all learn, but early on it's challenging. So don't worry about having a perfect, clear, detailed visualization. At least try to feel that the Buddha is there in the space in front of you, looking at you with this beautiful mind of compassion and love. And the Buddha has such compassion and love for every being throughout space, throughout the universe. And that's one of the main qualities of a Buddha. We all have compassion and love, but ours are limited. We feel them only for some people and beings, but not for others. And sometimes we even feel anger or hatred or the wish to harm other beings. So see if you can try to imagine what it would be like to have the mind of a Buddha and to be able to see every living being without exception, even really difficult people, people who do harmful things, even tiny little insects, which seems insignificant. But in the mind of a Buddha, every one of these beings is precious and worthy of love, compassion, kindness, and helping. So it's kind of similar to the way a mother would feel towards her little child, especially a small infant who's very helpless and vulnerable. So the mother feels just so much love and compassion and completely dedicated to helping, to taking care of that small child. So that's similar to the kind of compassion and love the Buddha has for every one of us and every living being. Just take a few moments to try to imagine what that would feel like. And the Buddhism says we have the ability, the potential to develop that same quality in our own mind. Universal, unconditional compassion and love. So see if that's something you would like to do, something you aspire to. So if you feel unsure about that, that's completely fine. It does take time to contemplate these ideas, get used to them. But if you do feel that it would be good to have more love and compassion like that of a Buddha, then this class, this course that we're going through is teaching us how to do that, how to expand our mind, our heart, our compassion, our love, to include more and more people, more and more beings. I'm trying to feel how fortunate we are that we have the chance to learn this. Okay, so I have prepared a slideshow with some of the points I'll be talking about today. So can those be put up on the screen? And by the way, um, if you're interested in having these slides afterwards, they are posted on the materials page, so you can access them there at the Thubten Norbuling website. So today, what we're going to cover, I hope we have time to get to all of these, a few points: how to listen to teachings on the Dharma, and the topic of motivation. And then I'll give some introduction to a couple of topics that come right at the beginning of traditional Lam Rim teachings: guru devotion, or also called relying on a spiritual teacher, and preliminary practices. And I've recommended that you get the book called The Easy Path. I hope some of you were able to do that. But we won't have time in this course to go through every single word, every single page of the book. You can read it on your own, but I'm going to focus on just some of the topics that I consider most important. And the book is called The Easy Path, and that could be somewhat misleading. You know, we might have the idea that, oh, we can just take it easy and lounge around on the sofa and watch TV and maybe occasionally, you know, think about the Lam Rim and very quickly, easily reach enlightenment. So that's not the meaning of easy here. In the book, the Easy Path, on page 2, there's an explanation of the word easy in the title. And it's said to be the easy path because this particular text combines the methods of sutra and tantra. So in Tibetan Buddhism, it's Mahayana Buddhism, and the goal is enlightenment. And for the attainment of enlightenment, there are these two traditions, or two ways of practicing: sutra and tantra. This is quite a big topic. It'll get clear as we go along. They're not like it's something you have to make a choice. Do I do sutra or do I do tantra? But rather, they're more like a graduated thing. Sutra is a bit like primary school or elementary school, and tantra is like university. It's more advanced. So one should first really get familiar with study and think about and meditate on the sutra level of things, and then later, when one is ready, move on to tantra. But this particular text, The Easy Path, contains some elements of tantra. So it's kind of a combination of sutra and tantra. One example of this is that in the preliminary practices, I'll start talking about that today, we're asked to visualize our spiritual teacher in the form of a Buddha figure. And then at a certain point, imagine light and nectar flowing from our teacher into ourselves. And this kind of practice is found in both Sutra and Tantra. But in Sutra, one is asked to visualize only light, not nectar. But in Tantra, there's also this addition of nectar. So that's one detail that maybe will become clear later. But that's just an example of how something is borrowed from Tantra into these practices. And another example of this is in the practices of guru devotion. I'm going to talk more about that later. Guru yoga. There's a sutra way and a tantra way of practicing guru yoga. So in this particular text, there's some elements from tantra. So tantra, you've probably heard about tantra, and it was very widespread in Tibet. Probably most people in Tibet received tantric empowerments and did tantric practices. But we are approaching Buddhism, especially Tibetan Buddhism, without the same kind of background that Tibetan people have. We're not born into Buddhist families and Buddhist communities. And so we really should first learn the sutra, such as Lam Rim practice. Lam Rim is actually the basis of Tantra. So one really should become very familiar with and also meditate on the Lam Rim topics before venturing into Tantra. Otherwise, you won't really understand what Tantra is all about. You may have misconceptions about it, and you won't be able to practice it properly. So Tantra really should be done on the basis of Sutra. And it's also not necessary to practice Tantra. Okay, it's something optional. I know people who've been studying and practicing Buddhism for many years, but still haven't received tantric initiation. Maybe they never will. Maybe they will later on. So it's something optional, not something you have to do. Okay, so the next slide. So checkup is something Lama Yeshe used to say a lot. He would say, check up, dear. Meaning, think about it yourself. Don't just blindly accept what somebody else says or what some book says. Some people are like that. Some people maybe don't like to think for themselves or don't know how to think for themselves. And they just want to be told what is true and what I should do. And then they will just blindly follow that. But that is not the approach recommended in Buddhism. So the first bullet point here says, the Buddha said we should check his teachings the way a goldsmith checks gold. So somebody who's a goldsmith who works with gold has certain ways of testing a material to know if it really is gold or not. Because there's stuff that looks like gold. And if, somebody comes to the goldsmith and says, hey, this lump of gold, would you like to buy it? So the goldsmith won't just immediately hand over a bunch of money. We'll first check that material to see if it really is gold. So there's a certain process of doing that. So the Buddha said we should do that with his teachings as well. We should check them very carefully and check to see if they are true or not. And this also applies to not just the Buddhist teachings, but also texts and teachings given by other Buddhist masters, both in the past and in the present. So Buddha recommended that we, even his own teachings, even the things that were coming out of his own mouth, he said, don't just blindly believe what I'm saying, but think about it for yourself. Use your own intelligence. Okay, so this is not, this is something most of us do anyway. We tend to be very skeptical. But just to let you know, it's okay to do. And in fact, it's highly recommended. The Dalai Lama has been talking about this a lot. He said, we really should be skeptical, have doubts, ask questions, investigate things, and not just blindly believe. And also the second bullet point, this is something I've heard from a few of my teachers. They say that, when it comes to learning and practicing the Dharma, we don't have to do everything. We don't have to accept everything. We don't have to practice everything, but we can be like a shopper, somebody who goes into a big supermarket or a department store, and there's so many things on the shelf for sale. You don't have to buy everything, right? You usually go in with your shopping list and you just choose the items you need and you leave the rest. So I found that really helpful as well, because there are things in Buddhism that we may find quite difficult to believe, difficult to accept, or difficult to practice. So it isn't like a question of all or nothing. It isn't that we have to accept it all, or we have to back off and not be a Buddhist, or that we have to practice everything right from the beginning. So we can pick and choose the things that we find helpful. We can take those on. The things that we don't find helpful, we can leave them aside, put them aside for now. That doesn't mean we should reject things, we should say, oh, this is rubbish. I can't believe this. How could anybody possibly believe that? How could anybody possibly do that? So try not to have that kind of negative, critical attitude, because something that you may find strange, unacceptable, meaningless, somebody else may find really meaningful, really, really beneficial. So, understand people are different. People have different likes and dislikes, and people find some things beneficial and other things not beneficial. So try to at least have a respectful attitude towards the things that you find difficult to accept or difficult to practice, understanding that for other people, those things are very meaningful and very precious, very beneficial. And the third bullet point is we also need to check our own ideas and assumptions, because they may be erroneous. We may sometimes have a kind of knee-jerk reaction to something we read in a Buddhist book, or something we hear a Buddhist teacher say. We may think, oh, that's ridiculous. That's absurd. How could anybody possibly believe that? But instead of just going along with that kind of reaction in our mind, it's good to, take a step back from that and ask, why do I think that way? Why do I feel that way? Do I have good reasons? Yeah. So check your own feelings and reactions and thoughts and so on to things that you hear, things that you read, things that you come across in Buddhism, and see if you have good reasons, if they're good reasons, or it's just, oh, it's what I feel, I feel this way. Well, people often have feelings about things that can turn out to be very wrong. I'm sure we've all had experiences like that. We may have a bad feeling about a person in the beginning, but then later on we find out, wow, that person's really amazing, really fantastic. It has lots of good qualities. So we've probably had those kind of experiences. So just because we feel something doesn't necessarily mean that is true, that is valid. So I also find this a really good way to look at myself and understand my own mind better, get a better understanding of my own mind and where I'm coming from. Where do my thoughts and ideas and assumptions come from? So it's a good way to learn about oneself. Of course, sometimes we are right. We do have a feeling about something and it turns out to be, correct feeling. But just to question that, just to question our ideas, our assumptions, our feelings, rather than just immediately buying into them. And the fourth bullet point mentions a sutra called the Kalama Sutra. You can look this up later on Google. It's a sutra in which the Buddha met this group of people called the Kalama people. And they came to the Buddha and they said, we have so many religious teachers coming to our town, and every one of us is teaching every one of those teachers is teaching some doctrine, and they're all saying, this is the way it is. This is how it is. This is true. And they're putting down other doctrines, other teachers. So they asked the Buddha, how do we know? How do we know who's right? Which teacher to follow? And so the Buddha gives some very good advice to them, which is good for all of us. And basically, just to give you the punchline, it boils down to what is beneficial versus what is harmful. If we investigate something, we find this brings benefit, this brings good to myself, to others, then that's something to follow. But if something brings harm, brings suffering, brings problems, then that is something we should avoid. No, the Kalama Sutra is not on the materials page of Thubten Norbu Ling. I haven't put it up there, but you can find it on Google. Okay, next slide. So this is something from the Lam Rim. You may have read it already. These are helpful states of mind to have when we listen to Dharma teachings or we study on our own. It said that we should try to keep our mind free of three faulty states of mind. And they use the analogy of a cup. So let's say somebody has some really delicious drink and they offer some to you, and you have a cup in which you can place this drink and then enjoy it. But there's three situations where you wouldn't be able to enjoy this drink. The first one is if your cup is upside down. Okay, so if it's upside down, then nothing can go in. So this is similar to a state of mind that is not paying attention. So I'm sure we all have this experience sometimes. There's a Dharma teaching being given or any kind of lecture that's being given, and our mind is somewhere else. We're off, thinking about other things from the past or the future or fantasies or whatever. We're looking at our phone or looking at something else. So we're just not paying attention. Another thing that can happen is falling asleep. So that's also when we're asleep, we're not able to really hear what's being said. So we should try not to be like an upside down cup and instead have a mind that's open, attentive, awake, alert, clear. And in that way, the delicious drink of the Dharma can come into us. And the second state of mind is being like a dirty cup. So if your cup is right side up, but it's dirty, it's got all kinds of dirt and grime and maybe even something toxic inside. So when this delicious drink goes into your cup, it gets contaminated. It becomes unfit to drink, unhealthy to drink. So with regard to a state of mind, this is similar to having a state of mind which is contaminated with unhealthy kind of thoughts and attitudes. For example, having a wrong motivation. Having, instead of a motivation of wanting to benefit, do good for others, do good for the world, maybe we're just thinking about ourselves and wanting to get something for ourselves. For example, fame or wealth. It does happen. I've met people like this, and I've also heard of examples of people like this who want to learn Buddhism and want to learn meditation, thinking, oh, if I learn this, then I can write books, I can start teaching seminars, I can become famous and make a lot of money. That does happen. It's rare, but it does happen. So that's an example of a wrong motivation to learn Buddhism. We should not be interested in just our own self-centered and kind of mundane pursuits like wealth and fame, but instead wanting to genuinely bring about a positive transformation in our mind and wanting to benefit others. So I'll talk more about that later, the right motivation to have for learning the Dharma. And the third one is like a leaky cup. So if your cup has holes in it or cracks in it, then the delicious drink goes in and immediately runs all over the table. You won't be able to enjoy it. So in terms of our mind, this would be like having a mind that is forgetful. Like we have this expression in English, going in one ear and out the other. Okay, so you might be attentive and listen, but then afterwards, you can't remember what was said. Okay, so ideally, we should try to retain what we learn. And you can take notes. That's one way of doing it. And also, teachings are often recorded. So if you do forget something, you can go back and listen again. But for the teachings to be beneficial for us, we have to be able to retain them, to keep them in mind and not just let them leak out. Okay, next slide. So this topic of motivation is very much emphasized, especially in the Tibetan tradition. They say we always have a motivation for the things that we do. There's always something that motivates us. we may not always be aware of what our motivation is, but it's good to do that. It's good to try to be aware of what is our motivation, because sometimes our motivation isn't very good. It may be maybe partly good, but partly mixed with ego or with attachment or with aversion or arrogance. So there could be unhealthy, negative elements mixed in with our motivation. And with regard to the Lam Rim in particular, it's said that there are different motivations that we could have that are good to have. Um, so the best motivation is that of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta we'll learn more about later, but this means the mind of enlightenment. Literally, it means the mind of enlightenment. But it refers to the aspiration or wish to become a fully enlightened being, a Buddha, to be able to help all living beings. So our real wish, our real goal is helping others to be free of suffering. And to be able to do that, we realize we have to develop ourselves, our potential for enlightenment. So this is the highest motivation, the best motivation, and it's the ideal motivation to have for learning the Lam Rim. But it would be difficult to have this motivation right from the beginning because of not really, maybe not knowing what is enlightenment and what do I have to do to reach enlightenment, and how by becoming enlightened would I be able to help others. So we really have to first learn the whole path before we can really have this motivation. So some of you are probably familiar with the Lam Rim. You've heard it before, and for you this motivation is quite comfortable. You're able to bring that into your mind. And then the second best, it's still very good, is attaining liberation or nirvana, which means I want to free myself from suffering and the causes of suffering, all the afflictive emotions in my mind. This is the attainment of nirvana, liberation. So that's also an excellent motivation for wanting to learn the Buddhist teachings and wanting to practice meditation. And then in the Lam Rim, it said the very minimum motivation we could have to still be considered Dharma in accordance with the Buddhist teachings is our next life, thinking about how, at some point we're going to die, and death isn't the end of everything according to Buddhism, but there's our mind, our consciousness that will carry on and take another life, another rebirth. And we want to make sure in our next life we're born in fortunate circumstances. Because if not, then it will be very difficult for us to continue learning the Dharma, practicing the Dharma, and working towards enlightenment. Because the attainment of enlightenment for most people takes a number of lifetimes. It's not something that can happen in one lifetime. There are rare exceptions to that, but most of us need numerous lifetimes to reach enlightenment. So we got to make sure that in our future lives, we will continue having the circumstances where we can learn the Dharma and practice the Dharma. So that's the real meaning of a fortunate rebirth, one in which we can continue learning the Dharma. So for some people, that would be very challenging because they're not really sure if there's such a thing as future lives, another rebirth. So we'll talk more about that later. It's a big topic in Buddhism. So the last bullet point says, if it's difficult to have any of those first three motivations, at least try to be free of attachment to selfish goals like fame, wealth, and so forth, and have the aspiration to be of benefit to others. And also yourself, to learn Buddhism and learn meditation in order to bring about a better state of mind in yourself, greater peace and happiness. And in fact, I just read in this, I mentioned this book last time called Path to Bliss by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, which is also a commentary to this text. So something that he said about this, he said, this is on page 18 if you want to look it up. Practitioners of the Dharma should not only have the ultimate aim of attaining full enlightenment, but also the goal of becoming righteous and kind-hearted persons within this life too. And he talks about how maybe a person who is listening to teachings is very short-tempered, but as a result of listening to teachings and practicing meditation, he changes, so becomes more patient. So this is the mark of having benefited from the Dharma. The fundamental questions, such as whether there is rebirth or not, and whether or not full enlightenment is possible, are difficult to answer. So that's quite interesting that even the Dalai Lama accepts that rebirth and the possibility of enlightenment are challenging questions, difficult to answer them. But what is very obvious to us is that a positive state of mind and positive action lead to more happiness and peace, whereas their negative counterparts result in undesirable circumstances. Therefore, if as a result of our Dharma practice we are able to alleviate our sufferings and experience more happiness, that would in itself be a sufficient fruit to encourage us to further our spiritual pursuits. So based on what he's saying, there's nothing wrong with just having the wish to be more peaceful and more happy, have a more positive state of mind, and be more helpful to other people, our family and friends and so forth. So that's like the kind of bottom line, the minimum motivation that we should have. So this question of motivation is something that it's not something we can sort of fix right from the beginning and then it's, we don't think about it anymore. But it's an ongoing thing. It's really good to look at our mind, ask ourselves, what is my motivation? Why am I interested in learning Buddhist teachings and practicing meditation? And try to be really honest with yourself. Try to, see if there could be some ulterior motivations that are not so beneficial, that may be more self-centered or even involved with some afflictive emotions, and try to weed those out. They can be overcome, they can be eliminated, and then just try to cultivate more and more of a pure and positive and especially altruistic motivation. So this is something to work on as we go along. Okay, next slide. And this is also coming from the traditional Lam Rim teachings. These are 6 helpful ideas to adopt when we listen to Dharma and practice them. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just focus on the first one. And I'd like you to think about this between now and the next class. The first one says, I am like a sick person. And the reason we are like a sick person, even though physically we may be perfectly healthy and not experiencing any physical illness, but being like a sick person is more in terms of our mind. As long as we are unenlightened beings, then in our mind there are mental afflictions, mental illness, like the 3 poisons I mentioned last time: greed, hatred, and ignorance. There's others as well: pride, self-centeredness, and so on. So within our mind, there are these mental poisons or mental toxins that make our own mind unpeaceful and unhappy. And they can also come out in our interactions with other people, causing our interactions, the way we talk, the way we act, to be problematic and even causing harm, causing suffering for others. So this is something we need to think about and check up if this is true or not. And if we can get to the point where we can see, yes, it's true, I do have these mental toxins in my mind, then the other ideas make more sense. The Dharma is like the medicine that will relieve this situation, that will cure these mental sufferings. Now, please, if you think about this, try not to go to the other extreme. Like some people might think, I'm completely okay. There's nothing wrong with me. My mind is perfectly fine just the way it is. I don't need to make any changes. So that's kind of one extreme. Somebody like that would have a hard time with this first point. But then there's other people who are at the other extreme and may think, I am just a total mess. I am a loser. I am a failure. My mind is just completely 100% horrible and bad and just full of all kinds of nasty things. And I could never change it. I could never do anything different. So that extreme is not right. Okay. So in between those two extremes would be a state of mind that says, okay, yes, I can see that in my mind there are some states that are unhelpful. Yeah, I have attachment and I get angry and sometimes I'm arrogant and selfish. But that doesn't mean our mind is 100% bad and negative. We all have good qualities. We all have potential. Okay, so please, try to avoid that extreme. So try to find some middle way where we can acknowledge we have some good qualities, but we also have some not so good qualities that we need to work on. So that would be the ideal. Okay, then I can see already I'm not going to have time to finish everything that I plan to talk about today. Let's look at the next slide. Okay, so I think I'll skip this one for now. This is in the book. It's just a list of the 8 main meditations that are included in the Easy Path, and this is like coming attractions, what we're going to be learning about and meditating on. But let's skip over that. Next one. Okay. So the very first topic of meditation in the Lam Rim is called relying on spiritual teachers, and it's sometimes called guru devotion. And having this topic right at the beginning can lead people to wonder. For example, this first bullet point, do we have to connect with a spiritual teacher before we learn and meditate on Lam Rim? The answer is no. Okay. The ideal way of doing things for ourselves who are coming to Buddhism, not having a background in Buddhism from our childhood and so on, is to first learn, the Buddhist teachings, get familiar with, and it's good to spend a couple of years doing that. Just get to understand what the Buddha taught, and in particular here, the Lam Rim. What is this path to enlightenment that the Buddha taught? Get familiar with that, learn about it, read about it, think about it. And you can do some meditation on it as well before, getting involved with a spiritual teacher, because the topic of a spiritual teacher is really for someone who's very familiar with the whole path to enlightenment and feels this is what I want to do. I want to go to enlightenment, and what do I have to do to reach enlightenment? We need to have a spiritual teacher, and we need to have a healthy relationship with a spiritual teacher. So it's not at all necessary to be connected with a spiritual teacher first before learning the Dharma. But then people might wonder, but while I'm learning the Dharma, I have to meet with teachers. I have to listen to teachers, connect with teachers. That is true. But because it's recommended that we don't just read books. I mean, you can learn Dharma from books. There's tons of books about Buddhism and about the Lam Rim, and there's also lots of things online So you don't have to actually connect with a teacher to learn Dharma. However, it's recommended that we do learn from living teachers, because it gives another dimension than what we can get from just books. You get a chance to meet somebody who's spending their time, maybe spent decades of their life learning and practicing the Dharma, and has developed themselves in certain ways, so they embody the qualities of the Buddhist teaching. So it's really good to have teachers that we learn from. But while we are in that process of learning the Dharma and still trying to decide if this is what we want to do or not, you don't have to see that person as your teacher, as your guru. It's important to have respect for them, yeah, and value them and appreciate their good qualities and so on. But you don't have to have this guru-disciple relationship with them. Okay. And another question that people often have, if you do get to the point after a number of years of study and just getting to the point where you decide, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to attain enlightenment. I want to follow the path to enlightenment. Therefore, I want to have a teacher. Do you have to request someone to be your teacher? Do you have to make a kind of formal request? For one thing, it's recommended that we don't rush into making a connection with a spiritual teacher. There are certain qualities that we need to look for, the ideal qualities of a spiritual teacher. And it said that we should take our time, get to know a teacher, watch them, not just when they're teaching, but at other times as well, in ordinary circumstances. Just observe that person and the qualities that they have, and really check carefully, does this person have the right qualities? Because there's lots of charlatans, there's lots of false teachers, people who declare themselves to be this and that and have this realization and that realization, and they may even have many followers, and they may be very charismatic. But we need to really check carefully and have some skepticism about teachers before we decide to take someone as our teacher. So it's recommended that we spend at least a couple of years getting to know somebody before deciding that we want them as our teacher. And then if we do decide to take someone as our teacher, it's good to do, if you can, to talk to them and ask them to be your teacher. But that's not always possible. Sometimes teachers are super busy. They're traveling all over the world, and we may not be able to have that kind of close personal relationship. But you can still take them as your teacher. You can still decide in your mind, I'm following that teacher. For example, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Many people regard him as their teacher, but you can't really have this communication. It's very difficult to get an interview with him. And even if you write a letter, you may not get an answer. But that doesn't mean you can't see him as a teacher. Okay. So that is not a requirement to take someone as a teacher. And then this last bullet point is this term Guru Yoga, which actually appears a lot in the book, The Easy Path. It talks a lot about Guru Yoga, and it says that in this context, when we do Lam Rim meditations, they are done together with Guru Yoga. So this is a big topic, and I prepared a homework sheet for you with homework for next week. And there's a link on that to an article by Alex Berzin, who's one of the most long-term knowledgeable scholars of Tibetan Buddhism. It's an explanation of this term Guru Yoga. It's mainly used in Tantra. And he says in there that there is a tantric way of practicing Guru Yoga and also a sutra way. And the sutra way is what's explained in the Lam Rim. The tantric way is more for people who have taken tantric initiations and have a tantric relationship with their guru. So that may not apply to all of you. You can put that aside for now. But I feel that even the sutra way of relating to a guru, um, that it's better to look at this topic later. So I have decided, to put this topic of guru devotion or relying on spiritual teachers later after the great scope, after we learn about bodhicitta and the actual path to enlightenment. It's relevant there because by that time, you've learned about the whole path, what you need to do, what you need to practice to reach enlightenment. And if you really feel certain, this is what I want to do, I want to work for enlightenment, then it makes sense to look at the whole topic of spiritual teachers or guru devotion. So I'm going to talk about that later. But if some of you might be really eager to learn about it now, and I noticed that on Thubten Norbuling website there is a course on this going on now by Dr. Nick, old friend from Kopan. He's probably been teaching it for a while, but the videos would still be there. So he's teaching this topic of spiritual teachers. So if you're really eager to learn it now, then you can. So, yeah, so I hope that's okay for you, just to have a brief introduction to this topic of spiritual teachers, and we will look at it more later. So the next slide. Okay, so I'm not going to go through this today. Don't worry, we're running out of time, but just to briefly introduce it, because it is mentioned again at in the Lam Rim at the beginning, the whole idea of preliminary practices. And so the idea here is that in the Lam Rim, there are all these different topics that are to be meditated on. We need to meditate on them. And rather than just, we can just sit down and go straight into a meditation on Lam Rim. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But will it be beneficial? Will it really bring about a positive transformation of our mind? That's not sure. So the idea of preliminary practices, it's a bit like gardening. There's probably a lot of people right now who are starting to, plant seeds in their garden, develop a garden. So you can't just put the seeds right into the soil, and if you're lucky, something will grow. But a good gardener will know that you first need to prepare the soil, make sure that it's free of rocks and stones and other things that might interfere with your plants, and make sure it has nutrients and it's well watered and so on. And then you put your seeds in, and then there's a greater chance of your vegetables and flowers growing the way you would like. So that's the idea of preliminary practices. These are practices to work on our mind, to get our mind into a good state for doing Lam Rim meditation. And if we do Lam Rim meditation on the basis of these preliminary practices, there's a greater chance that our mind will change, our mind will transform, and good things will grow in our mind, good qualities and insights and so forth. So just to briefly point to the first one is cleaning your room and setting up an altar. So basically what this means is the place where you do meditation, it should be clean and neat and tidy. Sounds like mom, right? Clean your room, make your bed, pick up those dirty socks and put them in the laundry and so on. So probably for most people, this is something we do anyway. We make sure our room and our house are clean and neat and tidy, but it may not be true for everybody. Some people are kind of naturally messy. So I'm going to ask you, this is one of your homework questions, is just to check your mind and check how your mind is affected when you're in a place that is clean, neat, tidy, maybe has some nice smells, as opposed to if you're in a place that's dirty and messy and maybe has some bad smells. Just check how that affects your mind. Because that's one of the points here, is that our mind is affected by our environment. And if we want to have a nice, clean, positive state of mind, then it helps to have a clean environment to make the environment where you're practicing clean and neat and tidy. So that's something to check for yourself. And we've run out of time, so I don't have time to talk about the second part of this, but I'll do that next time, having an altar. So don't worry about that for now. So the last slide is just the homework for next week. And there is a sheet, a file on the materials page that explains this as well. So I'd like you to read chapter 3 of the book, The Easy Path, which is on the precious human rebirth. It's only 9 pages. It's not very long. And then, yeah, pay attention to how your mind is affected by your environment when you're in a clean and tidy environment versus a dirty, messy environment, especially when you do meditation. And then there's a couple of reflections. One is to reflect on the first of the 6 helpful ideas about being a sick person. Just how does that sound to you? Do you agree or do you disagree? And ask yourself why. Why do I agree? Why do I disagree with that idea? And another reflection, this is more related to the next week's class, is how do you feel about your life? Do you feel, you are very fortunate, your life is very fortunate, or do you feel miserable and unfortunate? So just check your own feelings about your life. Okay, so that was a little bit rushed. I think I have this tendency to prepare more than I'm actually able to get through. Yeah, and once again, if you do have questions that are related to anything I said today or anything you read in the book, you can send these to Thubten Norbaling, and they will pass them on to me, and I will try to answer them in the next class. So we'll stop here and just take a few moments to mentally dedicate the positive energy that we created during this past hour, generating a positive motivation, and then listening to these teachings, hopefully having some good thoughts, good insights, good feelings. So let's dedicate this positive energy to the welfare of all living beings. May it bring peace, happiness, benefit to all beings everywhere, help them be free of suffering, and help them get closer to enlightenment, their highest potential. Okay, so thank you. See you next week.